Hello, hello. Good morning. Hope you are doing well. So today we are expecting to hear from Superintendent Dana Earley of the OPP, Paul Leschied, and possibly a protester. I'm not sure who Paul is. He could be a protester from Coutts. We're also expecting to hear possibly from Coutts protester and he's a counselor in Alberta. I forget for where. Marco Van Huigenbos. I'm really bad at these pronunciations, so you'll have to forgive me. So let's just jump in. We're a little bit behind here, so just going to get this going here. Now,
indicates the direction came from the commissioner and Deputy Commissioner Harkins. That is incorrect. The decision to move forward was mine.
Okay, so that sentence that starts with she informed them that the change in direction came from Commissioner Carrick and Deputy Commissioner Harkins should be deleted, right?
That's correct.
And I understand that the first sentence that reads currently, following this call at 7:06 p.m., Superintendent Earley advised her command table that they should proceed. You want that revised as advise her command table that she had decided that they would proceed. Am I right?
That's correct.
So I thought there was another change you wanted to make to the first paragraph. No?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So is there any other corrections you'd like to make?
No.
Okay. So we'll have those corrections made, and this will be entered into evidence.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming in again for another day of this.
You are
We're
a
on to
superintendent
819.
with the Ontario Provincial Police.
That's
Wild.
correct.
And how many years have you served with the OPP?
28 years now.
Did you start your policing career with the OPP?
I did. Yes.
And back in January, when the Freedom Convoy events began, you were a strategic commander for the West region.
Yes, that's correct.
What areas were covered by the West region?
West region is basically Collingwood all the way down to Windsor. All the municipalities in that area that do not have their own police service is the responsibility of West Region OPP.
And how many superintendents were there for that region?
There's 3 superintendents.
Who are the other 2?
At the time is Superintendent Frankie Campisi and Superintendent Lisa Darling.
Okay. And do all 3 of you report to a chief superintendent?
Yes, that's correct.
Who was that in January?
It is Chief Superintendent Dwight Thibb.
Okay. And as a superintendent of the West region, what were your responsibilities back in January of this year?
As part of my responsibilities, I support 4 of the 13 detachments that we have in West Region. And I support the operational support inspector and take on the role, take on the role of strategic commander. Okay.
And at that time, were you based in London?
That's correct.
And I understand that on the 9th of February, you assumed a new role when Deputy Commissioner Harkins appointed you as the critical incident commander in Windsor.
That's correct. I received a call from Deputy Commissioner Harkins on the night of February 9th.
And we heard from Deputy Chief Crowley yesterday from the Windsor Police Service that you established a joint or unified command with the Windsor Police Service that oversaw the successful resolution of the blockade in Windsor.
That's correct.
So we'll come to those events a bit later,
Okay.
But I want to start by asking you about your training and experience that qualified you to take on those roles in January and February. Let's begin with your background with the incident command system. What kind of training have you received?
I have been a crisis negotiator for 13 years of my career, and crisis negotiators are used quite often in incidents. So I had experience that way. I am an incident commander as well as of 2012. And then in 2017, I was trained to become a critical incident commander.
And in terms of the courses that you had to attend before you assumed those roles, tell us about that too.
The critical incident commander is a 4-week course where you receive training in regards to larger incidents, how to manage them, communication, the execution, the options. You hear several different presentations from your subject matter experts, which include our emergency response team.
Could I ask
Slow
you
down.
to go a little slower for the interpreters, please?
Sure. My apologies. Subject matter experts that would include crisis negotiators, our emergency response team, our tactical rescue unit, our canine units, all options that
It's
would
going to
be
be a lot of
used in
dry
a critical
procedure
incident.
again, everyone. So get ready for that.
Which institution offer that course?
It's through the OPP,
And what year did you complete those trainings?
2017.
Were there different levels of training for an incident commander or critical incident commander?
The critical incident commander with the OPP is somewhat the highest at this point in
Okay.
regards to training.
And I understand you met some colleagues that you worked with
Hello.
ultimately when you were deployed to Windsor
Hi.
in February.
Yes, that's correct. I took the critical incident command course with now interim chief Jason Belair
Hello.
of Windsor Police.
And now you also took on some leadership training more recently. Tell us
Hello.
about that too.
How are you?
I was fortunate enough to complete the Canadian Police
Okay.
College Executive Leadership in Policing course, which is a
Hello.
year course. And I also finished the Rotman Leadership course
And you-
just in the fall of 2021.
Hello.
And you met another colleague who was
Okay,
to
so-
work in the
so-
Windsor Incident Command.
so-
right?
That's correct.
Who was that?
Inspector Carl DeGraff
Hello.
and I completed the Rotman course together.
Hi.
Okay. And isn't it true that you not only attended those courses and you had experience as an incident commander and critical incident commander, you also taught courses in that regard?
Yes, I have debriefed different calls on the incident command course as well as the critical incident command course.
Hello.
Now, there are two frameworks that we've heard a little about that, as I understand from our interview, when you approached the situation in Windsor. One was the OPP framework for police preparedness for Indigenous critical incidents. For those of us who are not familiar with that framework, can you tell us, give us a quick overview of what that is about?
It stresses the importance of communication and a tiered response, almost like a step ladder, that you explore different options amongst during the incident to see what option would be best to safely resolve it. An important part of that policy is the fact, as I said, communication, and also the introduction of our provincial liaison team. That's a key part of the framework as well.
Okay, we'll come to talk a little more about that. And the other framework is the CACP, or Canadian Association of Chief of Police National Framework. And you mentioned in our interview that that was consistent with the OPP critical policy. Tell us more about that.
That's correct. It certainly highlights communication and the different tiered responses, depending on the situation.
So were you familiar with both frameworks when you took on the role of critical incident commander in February?
Yes.
All right, let's turn now to, before we get to your role as the critical incident commander in February, I want to start with your role as the strategic commander for the West region in January. So that was when you were still working out of London.
Thank you, everyone, for the hellos. I hope you're having a good day. Hope you're having a
talk
good
to
day
us a little
so
bit
far.
about your responsibilities as the strategic
See what
commander.
happens.
But what specifically were your involvement with respect to the Freedom Convoy or the protests traveling through the West?
We had, at the time, we had numerous slow rolls and protests happening throughout our different municipalities. I had oversight on the events, worked with the operational support inspector and each detachment commander to ensure that we had the proper resources to effectively look after the protests or slow rolls that were going through our municipalities.
Now, when Commissioner Carrick testified at the hearing, he told us about a blockade on Highway 402 on around February the 6th. Were you familiar with that incident?
Yes, I was involved in that incident.
Tell us about your involvement.
On February 6th, which was a Sunday, we became aware that the protesters had blocked the bridge, the Blue Water Bridge in Lambton County. As a result, our provincial liaison team, as well as our frontline members, were deployed to the area. Provincial liaison team were able to develop a rapport and a relationship with the protesters. And ultimately, there was a number of different trucks that weren't able to cross the border at that time. And one of them ultimately was a friend of one of the protesters. And one of the truck drivers, I believe it was livestock. He was traveling with something that needed to be in a certain area by a certain time. PLT liaised with the truck driver that was stuck and with the protesters, and were able to work out the opening of the bridge. So that was a success. The bridge did reopen. We also learned around that time that that group, or similar to that group of protesters, were planning on doing a slow roll on Highway 402 that week. So we liaised with the organizers of the slow roll and to try to find out as much information as possible so that we could have the proper resources in place.
Mm-hmm. So first, with respect to the incident on the Blue Water Bridge, how long did it take to resolve that event?
I'd have to make reference to my notes, but I know it was maybe 2 hours, most 2 to 3 hours.
So it was really short.
Yes.
And was Highway 402 the highway that led to Sarnia, the Blue Water Bridge?
That's correct.
And would that be within the OPP jurisdiction, the police?
Highway 402 is correct.
Okay. Now, you spoke about other slow roll events, and we heard a little bit about that yesterday from Deputy Chief Crowley. What other protests or slow rolls were happening in the West region around that time?
If memory serves me, we almost had a slow roll in each municipality, but ones that I can recall specifically would be Essex County, Norfolk County, Brant County, South Bruce County, Huron County. So there was quite a few.
And as the strategic commander at that time responsible for these events, what steps did you take to monitor the situation or to prepare for any further escalation of the events?
Each event was specifically assigned to the detachment commander. He or she would then assign an incident commander to have oversight of the specific event happening in their area. They would also work with our provincial liaison team to find out as much information from the protesters. And we would ensure from a regional level that they had the supports that they needed.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you a recipient of the OPP Hendon reports?
Yes.
And did you read them regularly?
Yes, but I focused on the areas that were involving our municipalities.
Mm-hmm. So turning our attention now to Windsor, we heard yesterday that there was a
thanks
Hendon
for tuning
report
in, John.
on February
Really
4th,
appreciated.
that deals specifically with the potential blockade. So if I could take you to that report. The document number is OPP 50.
I have to post some things from last night, break them down smaller.
If we go to page 6, please. We go down. So you see the second bullet says commercial truck drivers and supporters may conduct slow rolls on roadways near the Ambassador Bridge over the next 3 days and may attempt to block the bridge on February the 7th. So this seems to be, compared to the earlier reports, this seems to be a more specific warning, particular to the bridge and with a date. Do you remember if you received this report or read it at around that time?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you know what actions, if any, were taken by the OPP to mitigate that risk?
I can speak to February 7th. That's when I became aware through Superintendent Crowley, now interim deputy chief, that the bridge had been blocked. I received an email from him. I then had a conversation with him, asking him what he needed. And at that time, he was looking for information in regards to what was available. I said, basically, whatever you needed.
I think I know the one you're referring to. Did you say February the 7th?
7th, that's
But before we get to that, I think there was another email earlier that you were copied on. So if I could take you to that earlier
Sure.
email, I believe it's dated February the 4th, and the document number is WPS 501880. So for context, I believe this is an email from Chief Superintendent Thip
Okay.
to Deputy Chief Crowley, and you were copied on that. So you see the headings, Windsor Slow Roll
Yes.
/ Bridge Protest. So you weren't the direct recipient, but you were copied on this.
Yes.
And so in this email, Chief Thip talked about the prospect. So we go to the second line. He said, should intel be received or action by demonstrators taken to shut down the Ambassador Bridge, don't hesitate to reach out for joint assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were copied because you were overseeing the emergency response team for the region. First of all, what were your responsibilities as for oversight over the emergency response team? What's the emergency response team?
So as part of the strategic commander, that's one of the teams that I support. So it's an oversight in regards to, do they have the proper resources, training up to date? I work with their team lead in regards to making sure that they have what they need.
So in this email, it seems like the OPP was taking a kind of wait and see approach. Is that fair?
We were waiting to see what Windsor actually required. So in this email, Deputy Chief Crowley was obviously being given my name because of my role as strategic commander.
And beyond waiting for a further request from Windsor, was there anything that, in your view, the OPP could do proactively to mitigate the risk at this point before the blockade materialized?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Well, let's go then to February the 7th. Now, you mentioned an email from Deputy Chief Crowley.
Yes.
I believe that email is actually dated February the 8th, if we're thinking about the same email. So I'll call up that document, WPS 5 zeros, or 6 zeros, WPS 60374. Now, is this the email you had in mind? Or was there another one?
There was one prior, and we had a conversation as well.
A lot of dry
Okay,
procedure, guys. We're going to have to bear through it.
Tell us about that earlier exchange.
It was basically confirming that the bridge had been blocked and that he was looking for an awareness of resources available. We then had a conversation. I wanted to confirm if he was asking for resources or if he was just trying to figure out options at that time. So I learned that he was trying to figure out options of what was available. And it was at that time that we had decided to send together jointly, we decided to send provincial liaison team members to Windsor to see if they could assist.
Mm-hmm. So is this email a follow-up to that earlier exchange?
It is.
And so when he was asking you, I know your people are very spread out, but my ask at this point is if we were to need POU or PLT down here, what would availability be?
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like he's ascertaining the potential availability of OPP resources.
Absolutely. He's looking for options.
And you mentioned earlier that you were sending some PLT members to Windsor.
That's correct.
Was that before or after this email?
That was immediately after. I believe they went down that day because the email is at 2:00 in the morning. So I wouldn't have got it until I woke up in the morning. But
So the sending of the 2 PRT members was a response to this request.
that's correct.
What about POU? He asked about POU here as well.
Again, he confirmed that he was just looking for options. So we discussed options.
So this is February the 8th. Now, we heard yesterday that Chief Masuno from the Windsor Police Service sent a letter on February the 9th, the following day, to Minister Jones. I don't think I need to call up that document, but for reference, the document ID is WIN 401648. And in that letter, Chief Masuno requested a minimum of 100 officers. Now, was that request before or after you were appointed as the critical incident commander to Windsor?
I wasn't appointed until the night of the 9th.
Okay.
So it would
So probably before.
before.
And we saw also on February 9th a document prepared by Deputy Chief Crowley. Before I take you to that document, I want to take you first to something you said in your interview about the relationship between resource request and planning. So we go to your summary at page 9, please.
Sorry, Council, could I get the ID for that document again?
Yes, it's WTS 6022. And Mr. Clerk, I'll be making frequent references to this summary, so it may assist to have that document open. So if we go to page 9. So Superintendent, you see under the heading, relationship between resource request and planning, you told us that when you took command on February the 9th, Windsor Police Service did not know the specific numbers and types of officers it required, and that the on-the-ground situation on February 9th dictated bringing in additional frontline and traffic officers to ensure public and officer safety. OPP accordingly sent as many officers as possible. After Superintendent Earley arrived in Windsor on the morning of February the 10th and began to develop a plan, she was able to develop more specific numbers and types of resources required to ensure that police had options to respond to various contingencies. So I want to show you a document that Deputy Chief Crowley prepared as of the 9th and ask you if that reflects the kind of lack of specific types.
So, Joan,
that you
just to be
mentioned in the
specific,
summary.
the Emergencies
And
Act
that
was
document
invoked
is
nationally, so it has national
WPS
relevance to everything that was going across the country.
60610.
And by the way, none of it justifies the Emergencies Act. Certainly it doesn't at all. It was all resolved without the Emergencies Act.
So we heard from Deputy Crowley yesterday that he prepared this on the 9th when Windsor made the request for 100 officers. We scroll down a bit. So it talks about different shifts and so on. And then there's more about the situation at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Does this reflect your understanding of the nature of the request that was sent on the 9th?
I'm not sure if I know what you're asking, but it reflected what they thought at the time they required.
Mm-hmm.
So when I arrived and we were able to assess the entire situation together, that's when we started to figure out plans and options, and then therefore the resources to support those.
So I guess what I'm wondering is, how is this kind of request in terms of what was needed different from the kind of request that you would have made to the different POU units across the province, for instance, after you arrived and started developing a plan?
Well, this specific request that you have posted here is for the front line. So POU was in addition to that. Okay. So I don't know if we could compare the two. But when the Unified Command was created, we had a mission, and that was to open the bridge to get the flow of traffic back with officer and public safety being paramount. And then that's when we started to develop the plans, which included a POU option.
Okay. If we go back to your interview summary, to that page that we were on before, you see the last sentence of that paragraph. She explained that developing an operational plan was essential to ensure that the deployment of resources would be impactful and resolve the blockade. Why was it essential? Why was an operational plan essential?
Well, before you request resources or you have officers attend, you need to be able to articulate to them the expectations of their role, why they're coming, and the tasks that they will be given. And without a plan and a mission as to what you want to achieve, that would be very hard to do.
Okay. So, so these are the initial steps before you became the critical incident commander. So let's turn our attention now to February the 9th, when you got a call from Deputy Commissioner Harkins appointing you as the critical incident commander. Tell us about that initial call.
Deputy Commissioner Harkins called me. He asked if I could attend Windsor to assist, that my role would be the CIC of the event, and that it was an urgent situation, so that I would receive the resources that I needed. He also alerted me that I had a teleconference that I needed to join within minutes. So the phone call was very quick.
So there was an urgency that he impressed on you. And just to understand the nature of the role of a critical incident commander, we've heard evidence before about the different tiers of command. There's the strategic command, there's the operational command, and there is the tactical command. Now, you were operating as a strategic commander before this appointment.
Yes.
And what is the role of a critical incident commander? Is it operating at a strategic or operational level?
It's at an operational level and specifically assigned to an incident.
So what was the objective of your appointment as the critical incident commander? Or for short, I'll just call it the operational commander.
The mission was to restore the flow of traffic to and from the bridge and into Canada and the US with respecting the Charter of Rights and keeping public and officer safety paramount.
Now, I understand that you went to Windsor the next day.
That's correct.
But on the 9th, you were still in London.
Yes.
What time did you get that call from Deputy Harkins?
It was approximately 7:30, 7:45, and then I was on teleconferences until well into the early morning.
So you got the call in the evening and you started to make some other calls.
Yes.
Tell us about those other calls, the initial calls that you made.
There was a call to my chief of West Region to provide him updates, and he was well aware because the deputy commissioner had contacted him. I also had teleconferences with the POU hub and the different team leaders of the POU teams.
What are the POU hubs?
They were hubs created that consisted of different POU teams from different services that were being deployed throughout the province to assist with protests.
And when you said services, are these OPP detachments or are these municipal services as well?
OPP and municipal.
How many POU units are there across Ontario? Can you say?
Oh, I can't, sorry. I can tell you who was on the calls or who I dealt with, but it included obviously our team. It included Hamilton at the time and Waterloo, and ultimately London assisted as well, and RCMP.
So you reached out to the POU units in these municipalities that evening?
Yes. So the deputy commissioner had advised me that the teleconference was already set. It was already scheduled, and that I would be joining them. And they would learn that I was going to be the CIC and Unified Command and heading to Windsor.
What did you find out from the teleconference about the availability of these POU teams?
We discussed numbers and what was available. We discussed relative to the incident, in regards to when could they attend, who was available to assist with planning. So that those were the basis of the conversations.
Was there a request to deploy those units on that evening?
Yes.
What did you ask for?
I asked for the planners. So each team identified basically a team lead or a planner. So I asked for the planners to join me in Windsor the next day.
Now, at this stage, you didn't have a plan yet, right?
Correct.
So if we go back to what we talked about earlier about the need for a plan to inform the asking of resources, what did you ask for and what could reasonably be expected at this stage?
I needed them to become very familiar with the incident and all the details of the incident and then create a plan.
What about numbers?
Well, I needed to know what would be available. But again, it wasn't until they had a plan that they would say that this plan requires this many officers.
Okay. So you talked about how you spoke to the chief. I believe that's Chief Thip.
That's correct.
You spoke to, you were engaged in these teleconferences about the POU availability. Who else did you call?
I believe it was 2 teleconferences. Well, it was with the chief and 2 other teleconferences with POU hubs.
What about, did you make contact with Windsor Police Service at all?
I did. I spoke with Deputy Chief Crowley.
And tell us about that conversation.
He provided an oversight and the situational and situational awareness for me in regards to what they were dealing with at the moment. We talked about logistics, obviously, when I would be arriving. I gave him an overview of the teleconferences I had been on in regards to POU.
Mm-hmm. Now, if I could take you to another OPP document, it's OPP 404540. I understand that that night, the last thing you did that night at 11:59 p.m., you sent an email to your superiors summarizing the situation in Windsor as you've gathered. So I'm taking you to that email. If we could go to page 14, please. Go down. So February 9th, I think I was wrong on the time, is at 23:58. So 2 minutes before midnight, you sent an email to Harkins and DeMarco. Who's DeMarco?
That is Deputy Commissioner DeMarco.
Okay. How many deputy commissioners are there?
There are 3 and there's a provincial commander as well.
Okay. So you sent an email to these 2 deputies and you summarize the situation as you found them in Windsor. We scroll down further. There are many bullet points. I want you to help us unpack the situation
so
a bit.
just working through some stuff over here.
What did you learn?
As per usual.
What's the situation on the ground in Windsor?
I learned obviously about the numbers, what they were dealing with in regards to attendance, as well as vehicles, the types of vehicles. I also learned the area that they had kind of blocked, the length of it, where it is located in the city.
Thanks for your appreciation, Donna.
I also learned about an arrest that was made. So there was a person who had jumped the curb and into the crowd. That person obviously was charged and arrested with dangerous drive, and that the crowd became very agitated when the arrest occurred. And they actually took the opportunity to expand the area that they had been in. I learned too from Deputy Chief Crowley that the crowd itself was somewhat unorganized and disjointed.
It's called
hard
grassroots.
to kind of figure out exactly what they wanted or to communicate or negotiate with them. And at that time as well, he explained that there had been a number of transport trucks and vehicles on the bridge, but they had all been removed at that point. So I made the decision that I asked Staff Sergeant Jamie Smith of Essex OPP, so he would be the closest incident commander, to attend the command post for the evening. I also asked that our situational reports be implemented. So it's basically a template. We introduced those to the command post, and I asked for those to be provided to me every 2 hours until my arrival. And then they continued while we were there.
So that's what you did that first night.
That's correct.
If we go back to your summary, I want to take you to page 3. Because you spoke to us about this email, and then at the end of that paragraph, you said, Superintendent Earley nonetheless believed that a policing solution to the demonstration was possible. What did you mean by that? The policing solution in your mind?
I still believed and was hopeful that negotiations could occur and that we could develop a rapport and a relationship with the protesters through our provincial liaison teams.
Was that an approach informed by the 2 frameworks that you told us about?
That's correct.
Now, before we go to the next day, earlier that day, before you got the call from Deputy Harkins, I think you told us in the interview that you watched a morning press conference where the mayor of Windsor, Mayor Dilkins, requested resources without specifying the numbers. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I don't remember specifically watching it, but I do know that a request was submitted.
Right. So, and during our interview, you shared your perspectives on making public announcements of this nature. Tell us about your view on this.
In regards to specific numbers requested at incidents?
No, about making public announcements. I think we've heard some evidence that normally the request for resources go from one chief to another, from chief to chief.
Yes.
And it's not typical that public
Frank
announcements
All.
by politicians.
That's the
were
commission
made.
counsel here. He's
You shared your perspective on.
he's
this
very
kind of public announcement. So I'm just
he's interesting
hoping
to
that
listen
you
to
could,
because
enlighten us.
he's sharp
Okay.
and
It's been my experience that
very
when
objective.
any municipal service requires our assistance, no matter what the incident, the request needs to go from their chief to our commissioner. The commissioner's
certainly one of my
command team then
favorite commission
reviews the
counsels.
request and deploys the.
you listen long enough, you start to like some of
requested
them. You're like, oh, okay, that
resources.
one's going to be interesting.
So to hear it come from a politician was different from my experience.
And after you became the critical incident commander, did you take any steps to change the approach or any kind of media strategy that you adopted?
I respect the fact that any council or mayor, they can have their own press conferences and release information, but I urged Windsor Police Service to work with the mayor's office to make sure that our messages are consistent.
And was any further public announcements made for resources after you assumed the role of critical incident commander?
Not that I'm aware of.
Now, in this case, the announcement on the 9th did not specify a particular number, how many officers were needed. Do you have any view on whether those numbers should be made publicly in a request?
In my opinion, I do not believe that they should be made publicly.
Why not?
It jeopardizes perhaps the public and police officer safety by letting the public know the amount of officers that are attending may lead to people then bolstering their protests or whatever that looks like if they know the tactics or perhaps the amount of officers that are attending an incident.
Okay. So let's go now to the next day, February 10th. I understand that you had an early morning call with Deputy Harkins, right?
Correct,
At
and
8:30.
Deputy DeMarco.
And Deputy DeMarco. So tell us what was said in that morning call.
They wanted to make sure that I had started implementing a team, putting a team in place. And obviously I had told them that I was on the road, I was heading to Windsor, and they indicated that whatever resources I needed, they would be provided.
Was anything said about Windsor being a priority?
Yes,
Tell us about that.
yes. They stressed to me that Windsor was my priority and I needed to focus solely on Windsor and that it was a priority for the province.
Did they explain why Windsor was a priority?
No.
Now, if I could take you to page 2 of the summary. So if we go to the third paragraph, near the middle of the paragraph, do you see the sentence that starts with during a February 10th, 8:30 a.m. call?
Yes.
So it says, Deputy Commissioners Harkins and DeMarco again advised Superintendent Earley that Windsor was the priority and that it was urgent to resolve the blockade. Superintendent Earley understood that the resolution was urgent because the bridge closure was having massive economic impacts, including job layoffs on Windsor, Ontario, and Canada, that the crowd of protesters at the blockade was increasing in size and that the public and officer safety risks were escalating. Now, you understood that to be the case. Was that, where did that understanding come from?
It was part of the conversation, but in regards to the increase in size, the economic impacts, the risk to public and officer safety, that was from my awareness from the teleconferences I had been on and discussions with Deputy Chief Crowley.
So you had this call at 8:30, and I believe by 9 a.m. you had your mission statement written.
Yes.
So if we go to the summary at page 5, we excerpted your mission statement, I believe, from your notes.
Thank you.
And it reads, the OPP and our policing partners will keep the peace, enforce legislation, establish and maintain the safe flow of traffic, and respecting individuals' charter rights to peaceful assembly and freedom of speech, with public and officer safety being paramount. Why was the mission statement or the drafting of a mission statement such a priority for you?
It is it's the goal of any team member, no matter what uniform you're wearing, your rank, your role in regards to the team. That is our goal during the incident.
And did this version of the statement continue to be the mission as events unfolded?
Yes. Yeah.
So I understand that a plan was finalized by the end of the day on the 11th, and the plan was implemented on the 12th. Was this the same statement that appeared in that ultimate plan?
Yes.
How did you come up with this plan? How did you draft it?
Based on the situation, right? That's where your mission comes from and what your goal is, what you're trying to resolve. That's how your mission statements come through. And obviously, as a CIC in the training that we receive, mission statements and the importance of them are discussed.
And there are references to respecting individuals' charter rights. How did you intend to do that?
Absolutely. Well, by obviously giving them the right to peaceful assembly and to honor their freedom of speech. We tried to do that through communications with our provincial liaisons team.
So that was 9 a.m. What time did you arrive in Windsor?
Oh, I think it was approximately 10. I had to stop and pick up my scribe as well. So I think it was around 10, 10:30.
Oh, scribe, that's one of our fancy words. If
And
somebody
what was
says
the
scribe 3
supposed
times,
to
don't
do
take a
when
drink.
you're the critical incident commander?
So the scribe is a very important role. She took all of my notes for me. So she captured the majority of conversations and timings, people's phone numbers, whatnot.
So the different volumes of notes that we
Yes.
receive in disclosure, those were the scribe's notes, not your notes.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. So you went to Windsor and you met with the command team from the Windsor Police Service.
Yes.
Tell us about that meeting. What kind of reception did you receive?
Very welcoming. Because of the relationships I knew, as I said, Deputy Chief, at the time, Deputy Chief Belair, as well as Inspector DeGraff. They then introduced me to other members of their command post. Obviously, it was referred to as the EOC here as well. So I met everybody. They were very welcoming. They appreciated
Yeah, that's what it is, isn't it, Darlene?
the support and the assistance and the resources that the OPP was providing. And they also welcomed the experience that our organization has in regards to major prolonged events.
Was any decision made at that initial meeting about how the WPS and the OPP would be working together?
Mm-hmm. Certainly, it was right off the start. It was a unified command. They ultimately respected that I would have final say on a lot of the plans because of the amount of resources that we were bringing and that included. But everything before it was decided was always referred to by both myself and the CIC from WPS.
So yesterday we heard from Deputy Crowley. I think he described the relationship as, I'm trying to look for his description. He described the integration as seamless, and he talked about how the OPP and WPS commands would at times be stepping forward and back. Were you here when he testified?
I watched it. Yes.
You watched it.
Yes.
Do you agree with that description?
It was seamless, and we supported each other. It was a remarkable team effort.
And in your interview with us, at page 3 of your summary, you referred to this high degree of trust and confidence. Tell us more about that.
As I mentioned, Windsor Police respected the experience and the skill set that the OPP was bringing to the table due to the numerous events we've experienced as an organization in regards to critical incidents and protracted critical incidents in particular. So with that, that's where the trust and the respect came through. But at the same time, we weren't able to do what we did if it wasn't for the local knowledge and the networks and the partnerships that Windsor Police already had in existence.
Now, I think Deputy Crowley referred to this command structure as unified command.
Yes.
And in your interview with us, you referred to it as joint command. Are they the same thing?
Pretty much, yes.
We've heard other terms in Ottawa, integrated command. Like, what's your understanding if there are any differences between integrated, joint, or unified?
Really, I think to explain ours, unified would articulate it best.
Okay. And in terms of the expertise that the OPP was bringing, I think yesterday Deputy Crowley referred specifically to maybe planning and specifically the POU planning. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, so when I arrived in Windsor, I requested subject matter expert in regards to POU planning, Inspector Jason Unin. I contacted him and I requested he attend to offer his expertise in regards to a plan.
Sorry, name again?
Inspector Jason Unin.
Okay. Well, that's let's talk about the command team then, because after you arrived in Windsor, I guess one of the first things you did was to assemble a command table.
Yes.
And during our interview, you said that you wanted broad representation at the command table and subject matter experts in all the essential areas to ensure that those areas are covered. What are the major areas that you had to cover?
Those areas consisted of traffic, crime, provincial liaisons teams, media, and logistics and resources. In addition to that, we also were able to set up a staging area. So there was a team that was in charge of the staging area as well.
What about intelligence?
Absolutely. Yes, intelligence as well.
And how was intelligence represented at this command table?
They deployed a team leader to sit in the Emergency Operations Center with us and a team member as well. So they were constantly feeding us any intel that they were getting. And I'd like to mention too, all those subject matter experts that I just listed off there, it wasn't just OPP, but Windsor had the same representation. So for example, on Intel, we had OPP Intel as well as Windsor Intel in the command post with us.
So you had subject matter experts from both OPP and Windsor Police Service represented at the table?
Correct.
And they included intelligence. I think you mentioned PLT.
Yes.
POU, you mentioned Inspector
Yes.
Unin. Who was responsible for logistics?
Inspector Wendy Burrow as from OPP, as well as Inspector Jen Crosby from Windsor Police Service.
What about other agencies, such as the CBSA?
Yes, so CBSA was included in the command post. They had a representative there, a team leader, as well as the Windsor Fire had representation and Windsor Emergency Services, so paramedics.
Why was it important for these other agencies to be included at the command table?
All of those everybody who had a part of our command post provided us with different options, right? And options are very much needed in an incident like this. So it's important to create an environment that's inclusive, and communication is key so that everybody could provide ideas to resolve the situation effectively. Because the situation itself was very dynamic and fluid, we wanted to make sure that everything was covered. If you think about fire or EMS, that they were in the loop just in case we needed their assistance, which at times we did.
I understand you also set up a system where you had alternates so that you can go to sleep.
Yes.
Who was your alternate?
Superintendent Derek Needham.
And was there a similar system for the Windsor Incident Command?
Yes.
And who are those two?
So Inspector Carl DeGraff worked days with me, and then at night it was Deputy Chief Crowley.
Why is it important to have these alternates?
To go and rest your head for a little bit, and obviously just to provide some relief.
Okay. So far we talked about the team at the operational level, the command table that we just talked about. I want to ask you now about the relationship between the operational level functioning and the strategic leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So on the Windsor side, who was the strategic commander?
I believe you would have to confirm with them, but I saw that the Deputy Chief Belair.
Right. And would the chief of the Windsor Police Service also be at the strategic leadership level?
Yes.
What about the OPP? Who were the strategic leaders?
For West Region, Superintendent Campisi looked after that role, but also it would have also included our Chief Thib, and then the OPP command as well, commissioners and deputy commissioners.
So Commissioner Kirik
Mm-hmm.
and Deputy Harkins.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during the interview, you spoke to us about the importance for the strategic leadership to give the operational commanders autonomy.
Yes.
Tell us more about that.
Yes. The autonomy that is required is very important because decisions need to be made in a very timely manner when dealing with critical incidents. So that's really highlights the importance. They also know and can trust in the not only the experience the team has, but the training and the subject matter experts, the skill set that they bring, so that they know that those decisions being made are the best options for the situation, what's happening.
Help us understand, why is autonomy connected to timeliness of decision making?
You need to make sure that a decision is made. The failure to make a decision can almost be just as bad as making an improper decision. So that's why the timeliness is very important, right? And these situations, things are happening minute by minute. You need to be able to make decisions based on your awareness. And the CIC has the best situational awareness to make those decisions.
Why was it the CIC who had the best situational awareness?
You are in the midst of it. You have all the intel coming in. You are there. You have all the feedback from your subject matter experts. So that's why you have the utmost situational awareness.
During your time in Windsor as the critical incident commander, did you enjoy the kind of autonomy that you expected from the strategic leadership?
I did, and I appreciated it.
How was your relationship with the Windsor strategic leadership?
The same. They respected it from their command in the command post as well as mine.
Did you experience any interference at all, improper interference with your decision making as the operational commander?
No.
What about the city of Windsor or the mayor's office? Did you experience, what was your relationship with those entities?
Very little. Windsor Police dealt with them and liaised with the city.
Okay. Okay, so we've now covered the command team and the relationship with the strategic leadership. I want to talk to you now about the plan. We talked a bit about the plan, and I understand that you came to Windsor on the 10th, but by the end of the day on the 11th, you had a plan finalized and ready for action. Am I right?
That's correct.
How did that come about?
The remarkable team that I had. So with the mission that was set out, that everybody was very much aware of, the expectations were clearly explained to the officers and the subject matter experts in regards to what was needed. And that's how plans came together.
Now, let's talk about the different elements of that overall plan. During the interview, you mentioned many sub-plans,
Yes.
and you said those are necessary as part of the contingency planning.
Yes.
And they involve
This is
areas
pretty
like
tiring.
traffic, towing, mass arrest, prisoner transport, and some of the other areas that we talked about, intelligence, PLT, POU, and so on. I want to ask you specifically about three of those areas.
Okay.
And I want to start by asking you about the PLT element.
Okay.
So through the PLT planning, I understand that you came to learn something about the protesters group, about the leadership, as well as about potential counter-protest.
Yes.
So let's talk first about your understanding of the leadership. What did you learn through the PLT planning during those 2 days?
Mm-hmm. I learned through PLT that the protesters themselves were described as just disjointed. They had different goals. It was explained to me that the PLT was really dealing with three different groups within the protesters. And that was causing a concern, as well as it was a challenge for our PLT to develop rapport or to really get anywhere, because the groups themselves were not agreeing.
Mm-hmm.
I also learned from PLT of counter protests as well, and the concern for that. So they had discussions with an associate or a member from the auto union, and he expressed his displeasure with the protest, and in fact was sharing with them that he was going to take matter into his own hands if it was not resolved. I was very grateful for the rapport and the relationship that PLT was able to develop with him. And through that, we asked for time for his patience.
If I could take you to your summary, because I wanted to ask you about that incident.
Okay.
If we go to page 11. So this is, you talked about this incident involving the president of the local auto workers union chapter. You see in the middle of the paragraph?
Yes, I
PLT
do.
informed Superintendent Earley that David Cassidy, the president of the local auto workers union chapter, Unifor Local 444, claimed that he had spoken to Ontario Premier Doug Ford and that he was willing to bring auto workers to the blockade site to forcibly clear out protesters by Monday, February the 14th, if police had not cleared the blockade by that date. What kind of danger does this pose to your team as you were planning for action the weekend?
This is extremely concerning as a CIC, and it was just other options now that I had to consider, that not only the protesters perhaps would not like the plan of action, but we may have counter protesters attending as well that would create significant issues for public and officer safety.
So was this an example of how you incorporated PLT in planning for contingencies?
Yes.
Let me ask you now about the POU planning. So you mentioned earlier that Inspector Yunin was in charge of that aspect.
Yes.
And I understand that on, was it the 10th or the 11th, that you had a number of meetings with him and he advised you. So let's go to your summary. Maybe that
Okay.
will help
Thank
us
you.
both. Page 6 of your summary. So you see that at 4:21 p.m., you had a
Yes.
meeting with Inspector Yunin, and he advised you that a mass removal of protesters would be neither safe nor sustainable. Tell us more about that discussion.
So this is after he had arrived in Windsor. He obviously had time to meet with all the other team leaders from the PLU teams, and as well take a look at the situation itself. He understood, because it was such a long area, the 3 to 4 kilometers that they had occupied, that it would not be safe, as he stated in my summary, to clear the entire area all at once. So with that, he provided options to clearing out different sections of the protest area.
And did you agree with his assessment?
I did.
Was this an example of how you, as the operational commander, defer to your subject matter experts?
Yes.
The third area I wanted to ask you about in terms of planning is the involvement of the intelligence experts.
Yes.
Was it your objective to have your operation be intelligence-led?
Yes, I mean, intelligence does need to be considered in regards to what we're finding on open source or wherever the intelligence is coming from. And it was important to hear also from both teams, so from the OPP intelligence as well as Windsor intelligence, because of the different networks that both teams had, they were providing us with a better situational awareness.
So in terms of the tools available to your team, as I understand it, in addition to open source, which you mentioned, you also was getting some help from the US partners?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
That was mainly through Windsor Police Service because of the relationship they had with Intel through the States.
And in terms of other resources available to you, I understand that there was a drone that was made available?
Yes.
As well as poll cameras from the CBSA?
That's correct.
And even a helicopter on the day of the operation?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Again, just to provide current and up-to-date situational awareness so that we could have an idea of exactly what was going on in this very dynamic situation.
We've also heard yesterday about the presence of children
Yes.
During the blockade. And how did intelligence inform your planning about this aspect?
Back and forth between
Obviously, that was a concern of mine that if we had to use the plan of action, that I wanted the lowest amount of children to be there. Intelligence was able to provide me with areas that they had detected where the children were hanging out or were present in the protest. They were also able to tell me that because of their intelligence, because of their overwatch, that the majority of the children went home at night and very little of them stayed overnight. And so that led me to obviously looking at the option of going first thing in the morning with any plan of operation if needed.
Was that the plan, to have the action begin early in the morning?
Yes.
And what considerations led you to that decision?
Knowing from Intel that they had not observed any children overnight, and that when children were present, it was usually not till later in the day.
What about the size of the crowd?
Absolutely. So certain times of night. So the crowd, as in my summary, and I know Deputy Chief Crowley spoke to it, it would get more unruly certain times of night. And so we had to consider that, and numbers were higher at certain times at night. But as it got colder and the later it got in the evening, a lot of people did return home. So by considering an early morning operation, that again would hopefully decrease the number of protesters that we were dealing with.
Mm-hmm. So we've now talked about the different elements or sub-plans within the overall plan. Mm-hmm. Turning our attention now to the overall plan. If we go to your summary at page 6, and we go down, that's right, to the section approval of plans, the second paragraph. So on February 11th, Superintendent
when
Earley
children
also
were present,
an overall operational
doesn't sound
plan
like they were a primary
titled
tactic, certainly not like we've heard
Operations Plan,
yesterday.
Freedom Convoy, Windsor Ambassador Bridge. The plan stated that it contemplated an escalation in police response that is a considered and measured approach. And that events
They're talking
associated
about
with
Windsor,
Ambassador Bridge
Ontario.
blockade convoys shall be addressed at the lowest competent level in an effort to effect a peaceful resolution. So
That's true.
earlier you
It's about
mentioned
50-50.
in the
A lot of
context
them
of
were let go.
discussing the frameworks, I think you talked about the measured approach, the use of PLT to
Absolutely.
engage and all of that. I
And
want
if you want to
ask you
send me coffee, you can go to
specifically, to explain
buymeacoffee.com/patriotsmoothie. That is
about this concept of
buymeacoffee.com/patriotsmoothie.
addressing
If you
events at the
appreciated,
lowest competent level in the context of a kind of ladder or escalation. What does that mean? The lowest.
if you
competent
appreciated the
level?
last
The less invasive,
19
the
days
less,
of this, thank you.
so lowest competent level would be, the prime example would be our provincial liaison team. Being able to discuss the removal of protesters, for them to leave on their own would be ideal.
So that's what you would try first.
Absolutely.
And then if that did not meet with success, then you escalate.
Yes.
What would be the next ladder or the next step up the ladder?
I think jointly along with PLT, we are also using a media strategy to make sure that we were educating everybody in regards to that it was unlawful to be there, that there was other options that they
Unlawful to
could
be there.
express their freedom of speech. So there was the media attached at the same time as provincial liaison teams were trying to develop rapport with the protesters.
And then if that didn't work,
so next steps, we looked for different options in regards to enforcement. I do know that I had conversations with Windsor about their bylaws. There was a number of different parking bylaws in that area. So we learned that the protesters would park on side streets and then attend the protest. Their parking on side streets were illegal, so their bylaw enforcement was then deployed to the area. So a number of different tickets were given out to the vehicles, as well as some were towed. So that's just another level to let protesters know that they aren't to be there.
what's the next step up?
So again, all of these steps are not independent. All of these things are continuing. So even as cars are being towed by bylaw, we're still trying to have negotiations and develop rapport with the protesters through PLT. We're still using media to get that message out. The next step would be enforcement.
So we heard yesterday that even during the enforcement phase, attempts were still being made to allow some protesters to continue to protest, perhaps on the sidewalk outside the exclusion zone. Can you tell us more about that?
So the set area or the operational area was certainly explained through our media strategy, through the PLT, that people needed to be removed from there or remove themselves. And then other options throughout the city are really available, any public area. We have to keep in mind, though, that there are private businesses as well, and they wouldn't welcome protesters. So we had to make sure that we educated them in regards to that.
Okay, so by the end of the day on February the 11th, I understand you approve this plan?
That's correct.
And were you satisfied that you had received all of the necessary resources by then to implement the plan the next day?
Yes.
And the plan then was to implement the action on the early morning on the 12th?
Correct.
So I want to take you now to some specific events that unfolded on the 11th while you were making these plans.
Okay.
I understand that sometime in the afternoon while you were working on your plan, things were happening on the ground, and specifically, there was a kind of perceived breakthrough with the PLT team, right?
Yes.
Tell us what happened.
One of the protesters had approached our provincial liaison team and stated that if they had received a letter from the government indicating that the government was willing to meet with them, that they would leave. So PLT brought this to my attention immediately. I then asked for assistance through my command team to see if this letter see if the government would agree to this, and to see if this letter could be produced.
So in our interview, you described this as a kind of breakthrough because this was the first substantial request that the PLT team received from the protesters.
Yes, it was very hopeful.
If we go to your summary at page 12. So the second paragraph at 4:25 p.m., that's when you spoke to Commissioner Carrick about this request.
Correct.
And then by 5:29 p.m., a draft letter was already approved.
That's correct.
That's remarkably quick, within hours.
Yes.
What happened during those hours?
Quite a bit of back and forth in regards to just clarity as to what Mr. Neufeld was asking. And then, of course, it was the commissioner's command team who assisted in getting the letter so quickly, but it certainly demonstrated that we were trying our best to get the protesters what they were asking for.
You were still optimistic
Yes.
about the lowest competent level.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
I was.
So at 5:30, you engaged, you took part in a teleconference
Yes,
with some of the strategic leadership, and you learn that, so if we go down further the page, so near the middle of that paragraph, starting at 5:30, you see the reference to Superintendent Alakis informed call participants that PLT would be providing a letter to the Ottawa protesters that was similar to the letter from the provincial government to the Windsor protesters, right?
correct.
So now, Acting Superintendent Bowden has testified at this hearing a week or so earlier,
Yes,
and he told us, perhaps the best way to summarize his evidence is if I take you to his summary.
okay.
Can we go to WTS 6037, please? So this is the interview summary of Inspector Bowden.
Okay.
If we go to page 4. Go down. So you see that on February the 11th, the same day you were dealing with this breakthrough in Windsor. On February 11th, 2022, Inspector Bowden met virtually with Mr. Stewart and Mr. Hutchinson again. The plan at that point was to offer a meeting in exchange for demonstration leaders demanding that the trucks exit downtown Ottawa and denounce any criminal activity. Inspector Bowden then briefed Acting Deputy Chief Ferguson, who was in agreement with the plan. Later that day, Inspector Bowden also exchanged emails with OPP Superintendent Alakis about the actions being taken in Windsor and what kind of reaction that might create among the demonstrators in Ottawa. So things were happening in Ottawa, and you were dealing with rapidly developing situations in Windsor.
Yes.
So going back to your summary, this call at 5:30, when you were informed by Alakis, Superintendent Alakis, about this development in Ottawa. Remember the middle of the paragraph?
Yes.
So what the evidence given by Inspector Bowden, does that accord with your understanding on the 11th at around 5:30?
Yes.
And then if we go down the page, a series of meetings starting at around 6:17 p.m., continuing to about, if we go to the next page, continuing to about 7:06 p.m., a series of meetings between you and your command team, as well as between you and your strategic leadership
Yes.
at the OPP took place. Can you take us through those series of meetings?
Yes.
This is the dry part.
After
Not much
the
to say right
call
now.
at approximately 5:30 that included Superintendent Alakis, I made the decision that perhaps we need to delay what was happening in Windsor because the influence it could have in Ottawa. I then had conversations with the strategic commanders, Deputy Commissioner Harkins and Commissioner Carrigue, and learned, they reminded me that I did not need to act in my strategic commander role, that I needed to focus on Windsor. And it was during that conversation that they said, are you ready to go? Is your plan ready? And do you have the resources? Will the plan itself emphasize public and officer safety? I said yes to that. And then I changed my mind and decided to continue with my plan.
Okay.
Realizing that I didn't know the intimate knowledge of what was going on in Ottawa because my focus had to be Windsor.
Right. So going back to your initial concern when you were reconsidering implementing the plan the next day,
But it didn't influence
what
Ottawa. It really never got
implications
around
did
to any
you
of that.
think, the action in
Good day,
Windsor
Patricia.
may have in Ottawa? What were those concerns?
That it might agitate things there. And at the same time, I had to, again, my focus had to be on Windsor. So if we didn't go forward with the plan and prolonged, allowing the protesters to continue, what would that mean for Windsor? And that was my priority.
And then after you spoke to your command team, you had this discussions with the strategic leadership, and that included Commissioner Carrick, right?
Correct.
And Deputy Commissioner Harkins.
Yes.
And in that discussion between the strategic leadership and your role as an operational commander, help us understand what was the strategic input and how that affected your decision ultimately as the operational commander.
It was a reminder that I did not have all the good situational awareness of what was happening in Ottawa. They did, and that my focus needed to be on Windsor. And I could tell them without a doubt that the plan was ready. The officers were ready. We had enough resources. We had tried the stepped approach, and we were not getting anywhere. Of course, I was hopeful about the letter because at this time it had not been delivered yet. But any CIC will tell you that you have your plan and your resources ready. One of the best options would be not to deploy it because protesters left on their own. So I was still hopeful because the letter hadn't been delivered yet.
Right. So by 7:06 p.m., what was your final decision?
That we would be, if needed, if the letter was not successful, that we would be launching the next morning our operational plan.
Now, this is the paragraph that you made the correction when we began today's examination. And the correction you made was to the effect that it was your decision.
Yes.
As opposed to a decision made by the strategic leadership.
Correct.
Why is that important to you?
Because all those decisions moving forward in regards to Windsor and the plan, they were all my decisions.
Okay. So after this decision was made at 8 p.m., if we go down the page, at 8 p.m., the letter that was previously approved was now signed by Minister Jones, and it was distributed to the protesters. What effect, if any, did it have, that distribution of the letter?
Very little. Very little. It was disappointing.
And
very little.
And tell us about what was going on by then with the protesters.
Well, because of the time of day, we had seen this throughout the week. That was kind of the heavier times for numbers of people. Somewhat, I would describe as a party atmosphere was happening from usually 8 o'clock on during the evenings, and this was no different. So the party atmosphere had certainly began. Again, it was just very disappointing that the letter had little effect. Although I appreciated all the efforts getting the letter.
That wasn't what you were hoping for?
No.
So now was it time to escalate up the letter?
Yes.
Okay. So that takes us to the end of the day on the 11th. My colleague, Mr. Commissioner, Ms. Hedarali will continue the examination with the events the following day.
Okay, thank you. Is this a good time for the morning break, and we can come back in 15 minutes?
It would be.
Okay, so we'll take the morning break, come back in 15 minutes.
Oh my goodness, Francois is so long.
Thank you, sir.
The commission is in
guys.
recess for 15 minutes. La commission
I'm
est levée pour 15
going to
minutes.
take my, I'm trying to set something up here with better qualities of things. So I'm going to go and implement the short break procedure. We'll see you soon. I'm trying to fix some stuff, guys, make it higher quality. Sorry, guys, just trying to make some things work here. I think I'm onto something quite revolutionary. Quality, I'm putting my hands up and the rainbow's coming around, and it's like the more you know, it's like the reading rainbow thing, but it's instead of that, it's quality, and I'm really working on quality. But my goodness, I have to exit this studio.
Order a lot.
Oh no, order a lot. That's bad. Nipigon! Good to see you, Nipigon. We're back with Superintendent Dana
The commission is
Earley,
reconvened. The commission reprend.
with the second commission counselor. We haven't seen this commission counselor before, to my
Good morning,
recollection.
Superintendent Earley.
Good morning.
My name is Sajida Hidarali. I'm Commission Counsel, and I will be asking you some questions this morning.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to continue where my colleague left off on February 11th. A lot of things happened that day. On that day, the
All right, quick second here, guys. Worst case scenario, things aren't working. One sec.